I am excited to welcome our first reader, Holly Thompson.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, and I want to thank Hal and Minter and Susan and Ram and everyone at Parkinson's Poetry, and all the poets reading tonight, and all of you who are here joining us. We're really grateful. I'll say a few words about my poems about my father before I start reading. My late father, a dentist, had Parkinson's for over 20 years. He loved cutting wood, working in the woods, crafting with wood, and these things sustained him in his later years. He taught all his children which sticks made the best kindling, how to split and stack wood, how to use a chainsaw. He made wooden lamps, sculptures, flagpoles, and later, even when Parkinson's made handwork nearly impossible, he carved bowls and spoons, and later oiled and rubbed them for comfort. And when his legs wouldn't cooperate, he would crawl. When he could no longer cut wood, he gathered wood. And when he could barely do that, he continued to gather kindling on his knees. He also loved to row. He'd rigged a canoe with a rowing apparatus, and late in his Parkinson's journey, when it was too dangerous for him to go out alone on the lake, he'd go anyway. And I'd race to follow in a kayak, savoring those dawn adventures with him until his body froze, and I'd have to prop him up and tow him to shore. And this was the inspiration for my poem, Water Striders. So I'll read two poems tonight, Water Striders and Kindling. And the first is Water Striders. You are on the dock before me, before the sun, impatient, not waiting, shuffling toward the rowing rigged canoe, lifting the stern to launch and nearly launching yourself. I steady the boat, steady your body, ease you in, strap your feet, shove you off, watch you set the oars and take your first longed for pull. Behind you, I slip into the kayak, paddle to reach you, already halfway to the small islands, and together, stroking the water, skimming over the lake's skin, slicing and gliding the stillness, we know this won't last. The sun will crest the trees, motors will sound, voices will carry, the wind will churn the surface, your strength will fail, and your senses too, cast to lake floor depths like stones dropping down to muscles poking through sand and leaves caught in crevices of cool granite shelves. So we pull against the water, push against the water, skim over the lake, taking this lake one more morning. And the next one is kindling. We learned to gather tinder, thin, dry twigs that fit in tiny fists and drop into boxes that tuck behind the cook stove. We learned to venture farther for curls of bark, pine cones that will smoke, and longer sticks that can be snapped in half if we step just right. We learned to seek out limbs, thick as our small arms, requiring a hand saw or our father's weight to break. We learned to carry wood adults have split, stack it in even rows between two trees, and separate the seasoned from the green. We learned to swing an axe, raise the maul, and bring it soundly down near round's edge across rings of growth for the cleanest rip. We learned to recognize rot and respect knots and sharpen the wedges and pick up our tools when we're done. And then we learned to pull the cord and hum the chain through trunks, felling, thinning, clearing, hauling, and shaking sawdust from shoes at day's end. Then, decades of wood later, We retrace from chainsaw to splitting, to stacking, to carrying, until we are there on our knees again, the kindling gatherers with gray sticks tight in our gnarled fists, twigs that we release into a blurred box for someone else to carry inside, while we feel for their solid guiding arm. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. So beautiful. Our next reader is Brian Peterson.
I'm going to be reading for my husband. Brian has had Parkinson's for over 14 years, and I'm reading an excerpt from his essay entitled Alone. He asked me to say the following before I started. My husband is unable to read tonight due to the effect of Parkinson's on his voice, but he insisted that I tell you how grateful he is for all I've done to help him out and how much he loves me. I take pride in self-knowledge, consider it the highest human achievement. Often it comes by living your illusions until reality reaches out and kicks you where it hurts. I felt that kick when my legs stopped moving in the middle of a coffee shop one dark February night, and I couldn't get them to start up again. The legs just wouldn't move. Another kick happened in an airport when I got so frustrated with my body's refusal to cooperate that I gave in to my rage and decided to walk to the gate instead of riding the stupid golf cart, only to freeze up and break down in a crowded hallway while Helen looked on in helpless horror. And finally, full force, without warning, in the middle of the night in our small winter apartment when I couldn't avoid the truth anymore, with my wife holding me in her arms and all the years of fighting and learning and stubbornly refusing to admit that this disease would have its way with me. It all came out in a rush, and I broke down and wept like a motherless and fatherless child. You know you need more dopamine when the first thing you think about in a restaurant is how far your table will be from the toilet. A few days after the airport meltdown, I met an old friend for lunch. Sure enough, he'd arrived first and placed us at the most mathematically distant location possible from the bathroom. Not letting a few lousy neurons ruin my life, I muttered to myself as I tapped my way in his direction, lurching forward here and there, grabbing the back of a stranger's chair to prevent disaster, and every head in the room turned in my direction. I think I'll have somebody make a portable LCD sign that I can wear on my back and turn on when necessary. Parkinson's disease, the sign will say, followed by, resume your lives now. Halfway through lunch, the bladder spoke. I excused myself. My friend looked at me and said, will you be okay? Need some help? Nope, I said, just get comfortable. Turned out that half the restaurant was unoccupied. What a relief. No waitresses suddenly crossing my path, no complex interplay of flashing lights and noise, nothing to mess up what my doc calls the Parkinsonian brain. But the section wasn't empty. At the last table before the men's room, I passed a lady sitting quietly by herself, reading, drinking coffee. She glanced up, saw the walking stick, studied my face briefly and said, sometimes my toes really bother me and it's hard to walk. I nodded but said nothing, too busy concentrating on the next challenge, the bathroom door. The Parkinsonian brain has trouble with doorways, barriers, transitions. Revolving doors, kiss of death. The experts don't know why. Something goes haywire as the brain processes sensory input. The legs sort of explode beneath me like a blast of electricity has turned them into slow motion jackhammers. Meanwhile, the rest of me keeps right on going, and suddenly my whole body is pitching forward like it's marching down a steep hill. I managed the bathroom door, took care of necessities. Tapping my way back, I passed the nice lady again. She had been kind enough to start a conversation, so to be polite, I said, "I guess you don't appreciate what you have until you lose it." She turned toward me, closed her book. "I had cancer, and it was a close call." I nodded, looked down at my feet. "Parkinson's." She smiled, a grim smile, friendly but hard-edged. The smile of a wounded soldier who'd briefly found a comrade in arms, someone who would listen to what she had to say so she would not be wasting her words. "You have friends," she said. "You have people who care about you, who love you, but you have to face it alone." I nodded. So true, I thought as I inched forward, walking stick thwapping on the hardwood floor. So true. Each of us a solitary soul, trying to find our way, seeking guidance and friendship. But no one can do the seeking for us. Sometimes people try, but the ones who shout the loudest are the most afraid to face what the restaurant lady had faced: the betrayal of her body, the uncertainty, and the essential aloneness of every conscious soul. But from that solitude, we reach out, discover that we're not alone. We connect, we form communities, like me and the restaurant lady, solitary comrades. My solitude meets yours, somewhere there in the middle, in the air between us. A door opens and a breath, a zephyr of love flows through. Invisible, fleeting, but is there anything more real? Anything more somehow permanent? I greeted her smile with mine, tipped my head in her direction as she lowered her gaze and opened her book again. I turned back toward my friend. Thwip thwap, alone. Yes, but never alone. Yes, thwap thwip, always, never alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you, Helen, for reading his work. So beautiful. Our next reader is V.A. Smith. Virginia, I don't think can you unmute?
I thought I did. How about this? Is this good? I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. I have a book coming out in spring 2022 in May, and it's titled Biking Through the Stone Age. And it contains, 4 or 5 mother poems in a grouping of 45 or so. I'd like to read 2 this evening that focus on my mother's Parkinson's. One you have not seen. It's short. I don't think I need to say much about my mom because I think the poems will tell you all you need to know. She passed this coming on last August, so it's about 12 to 14 months ago. And she was a pistol. The first poem is called My Mother's Pedicures. Though I nudge her toward plums and apricots, She always chooses proper pinks, reliable reds. I scoop her into the mechanical chair, the sea of her stooped shoulders and back massaged, azure water and salts a hot whirlpool, salving her feet and legs. You have the magic touch, my mother tells every employee of the pricey discount spa, who gingerly stroke and rub her lower limbs, their faces furrowed, worried maybe their thumbs might push through her paper-thin skin. I have Parkinson's, you see, so these pedicures work wonders for my leg pain. It wakes me up nights. My mother shouts in English to Asian American women and men whose bilingual skills and polite smiles and nods betray neither her nor their gaps in understanding. Sometimes she winces as they dig deep into the beds of her toes, tweezing shards of ingrown nail from her tender pads. When her toenails have been brushed with fuchsia, her calluses buffed, quote, smooth she chirps as a baby's bottom. I lift her into my car, holding the pain painted beneath my mother's scarce pleasures. I'll read Garvey Manor. This is where my mother lived quite happily for most of the time for 5 years of her life, the last 5 years of her life. Garvey Manor, a tiny dervish, my mother whirled around assisted living, smiling and chatting like a girl running for homecoming queen. Now pushing 90, she's no longer up at 5, sprinting with her walker to fold her clean laundry and then read the local obituaries, quote, to make sure I'm still alive. Her body's pleasures and pains strike their own balance these days. She drags herself, diapered and dripping, out of bed at 10 and into her accessible shower, sinking into her chair, hot soapy water stroking her thighs and belly, forgetting finally her lifelong utility budget. Emerging naked through the steam, blinking and sightless as a newborn, she readies herself for breakfast, where she will spill coffee down her pastel polo during a cat nap, pulsed hands trembling. She marvels to me about her colleagues in suffering and bingo. First, Father Delgado, legless, sacred air filling the space where flesh should be. But there he is in his wheelchair, grinning, buying cards in the gift shop or stretching his torso heavenward on the chinning bar at PT. He's amazing, and there's Dottie, so teensy she slips from chairs, but guess what? She wears a size 10 shoe and births 10-pound boys up there on the mountain where she was a nurse. Not my mother's voice now. And then so many get disappeared, it seems, slumped and snacking during movie time one day. Quote, then I'm watching them carried out of here the next good and dead. You get used to it. When we quarantined in March, nursing home staff cuts left her as a ghost town. I can't remember the last time I had dry pants, my mother laughs, still up for stoic shtick. But they call me sunshine here, you know. Others always complaining, but not me, not I. Still, she thrills at the finches, darting, bickering, picking at berries, and she concedes probably, you know, mating. The night before she dies, she's rhapsodic on the phone about a beach day years back, poking along the shoreline, our steps scattering plovers. When I wake, my mother appears, head bent low over her walker, large breasts like pendulums pulling her earthward, her body's gas and dust rising as blinding sunlight. Thank you.
Thank you, VA. Thank you so much. Just like to take a moment between poems. It's so beautiful, but also so emotional. So it's good to just take a breath. Our next reader is Sarah Beth Childers.
All right. Thank you. All right, I'm going to read most of a short essay about my dad who has Parkinson's, called Lydia. My dad's Parkinson's disease seems to date from my 22-year-old brother's suicide in 2012. Joshua was my parents' youngest child, the last infant to coat himself in a burst bag of flour, the last toddler to press wispy blonde curls against my dad's shoulder for a nap, the last teen to speechify in the living room about how no one understood him, the last to shake the principal's hand in his cap and gown. After my dad's diagnosis in his early 60s, 5 years after Joshua's suicide, my family realized my dad had shown early symptoms for 20 years, tiny handwriting, episodes of punching and screaming while he lay asleep, constipation, rounded shoulders, lengthy pauses between sentences when he told a story. So maybe the onset was gradual, but I do know this. While I was lost in my own grief over Joshua, my heartbroken dad transformed. Before Joshua died, my dad could lift an aluminum canoe onto a minivan's roof rack, outpace his 4 adult children on a trail through the Appalachian foothills. After, a whole restaurant table rattled when my dad grabbed it to steady himself, and walking was a fight. All right, and then I'm skipping a part where I talk about how I decided not to have children after my brother's suicide. And then I heard a radio program where a woman talked about how her husband's Parkinson's had improved quite a lot for 2 years after he had his first grandchild. And then I just felt really moved that I would like to have a child again. So then I'm just move ahead to having the baby. I tested at 3 weeks, frighteningly early since most miscarriages happen between weeks 3 and 5, and I was 37 years old. But my husband and I had been trying, and I wanted to know. I went ahead and called my family. If heartbreak was coming, they'd handled worse before, and they needed happiness. My dad has lost his job as a pharmaceutical formulation chemist in a plant shut down, and new job prospects seemed to disappear the moment hiring committees met him in person, and often when they heard his voice on the phone. Right after the layoff, my dad's health and strength had improved, more time for self-care and exercise, but I could tell depression was settling in. He looked stiffer, moved more slowly every time I visited West Virginia. He appeared to be zooming through the Parkinson stages. I wasn't sure how many years he'd want to fight to live well, or even stay alive. On the phone with my parents, clutching my pee-dip stick, I said only, I got a positive result on a pregnancy test. I wouldn't be ready for weeks to say I'm pregnant, but my parents hoped for me. My mom wrote an email right after the phone call. She said, I teared up after you got off the phone. However, your daddy just bawled. Lydia was born in April 2020, so my parents couldn't travel. In May, my husband and I drove the 1,000 miles during our 2-month-old's naps, waiting out our waking times in city parks with padlocked shut restrooms. My parents and sister, who lived nearby, watched from the window and met us in the driveway. My mom took Lydia and introduced her to every photo in the house. Lydia's dead great-grandparents, her Uncle Joshua. My dad didn't want to hold Lydia at first, fearing he was too unsteady. He watched as my mom held her and served as my mom's assistant when I took a break from baby care, warming breast milk with a chemist's precision. But by the last morning of our visit, my dad sat on the couch while Lydia slept on his shoulder, just like baby Joshua in so many of my memories. When I finished packing the car, my dad said, his eyes smiling, "You can't have her." After I took her, weeping, and traveled a couple of miles west, my sister called me. She said, Daddy says he's going to live to see Lydia graduate from high school. I decided to believe that by live, he meant good years. He would sit in the backyard as Lydia ran in circles, whooping and singing. He'd teach her to identify cardinals, bluebirds, chickadees, and robins. I felt certain he was right. Now Lydia is almost 1, and my parents are planning to move to Oklahoma. Like me, they need to get far away from the place of Joshua's suicide. And they want to help with Lydia's care. They want to vacuum her burst bags of flour, to listen to her teenage whining. 4 months ago, my husband and I took Lydia to see my parents at Christmas. My dad watched her crawl around her playpen. He held her on his lap while she studied her new rattle. When we got back to Oklahoma, I sent my parents some photos of Lydia and my dad. My mom said, David looked so young and healthy in those pictures. He did. My mom could see the young, strong man who had held baby Joshua, a man with beautiful years left in his life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah Beth. Our next reader is Andrea Serpa, but I don't know if he's here. Andre?
I don't see him listed.
Okay,
Go to Cynthia.
okay. Well, our next reader is Helen Mirkil.
Yeah, she read for.
No, I think Helen has her own.
There's
poem.
no, okay, she does. I'm sorry.
Helen.
I thank you so much for including me in this amazing project. And I've really enjoyed reading Hal and Minter's work on the website. So much of Minter's experiences is like mine. I would like to read a poem. Brian and I lived in a house for 21 years until it became clear we needed to move. So that's what this poem's about. Not in this house. You forged ahead up Big Creek, Clark Fork, Kootenai. You earned the name Montana. Told me campfire stories up the Bitterroot, black backpack, dusty boots, wide shoulders, black straw hat. Up mountain streams, we bathed in freckled light, the cloudless blue, the scent of evergreen. Today, your hands negotiate the kitchen, gripping as if it were Mount Sentinel with outcrops. Each leg hauls a ton. To live here in this house, small rooms, uncarpeted, thinking, what if at every turn? Then there's the insistent sound of dogs and sunrise scratching at the door. Thank you.
The manner of positive thinking. With my luck, I happen to sit next to a female version of Norman Vincent Peale on a crowded subway train. What disease do you have? She asked. You're shaking so much, it's hard for me to read my newspaper. Parkinson, I said. You got it wrong, she said. You should be trembling, not shaking. I'm a doctor, so I should know. Repeat it to me. I will not shake. Only my fingers will tremble, not my arms. If you're unfortunate enough to have a chronic disease, show the proper symptoms. Don't make up unrelated ones. I got off the next stop and got out of the car. It might have been more crowded, but at least she wasn't on it.
I'm going to reread it. The Bother of Positive Thinking. With my luck, I happened to sit next to a female version of Norman Vincent Peale on a crowded subway train. What disease do you have? She asked. You're shaking so much, it's hard for me to read my newspaper. Parkinson's, I said. You've got it wrong, she said. You should be trembling, not shaking. I'm a doctor, so I should know. Repeat after me. I will not shake. Only my fingers will tremble, not my arms. If you're unfortunate enough to have a chronic disease, show some proper symptoms. Don't make up unrelated ones. I got off the next stop and got on another car. It might have been more crowded, but at least she wasn't on it. Okay. The next one is called Avoiding Rigidity. It's the medicine that makes me shake, not the disease, I said. Then why take it, she said. If I stopped, I wouldn't be able to walk, I said. My body would become rigid. Rigidity seems much better than all that shaking you do, she said. I'd rather shake than not be able to move, I said. Each to his own, she said. But if you were right, I wouldn't have to worry about you accidentally hitting me on the head. But if I couldn't move, I said, what would we do to make time pass? We do nothing, she said. We do that anyway. Should I say that's not about me? This one? Okay. Learning new words. My Parkinson's medicine makes my arm shake. The medical term is dyskinesia. That's one of the benefits of the disease. You learn new words. You also learn new meanings for old words. When I say my windows are wide open, I'm not referring to the computer or those in a house. It means my medication is working. A half-closed window means the medicine is wearing down. A closed window means everything I do will now become a struggle. I just pray the window won't get stuck. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next reader is Minter.
Oh, hi.
Don't go anywhere.
Okay, I'm going to read 3 poems, which is interesting because I've just started writing poetry. I'm a prose writer that never thought I was really a poet. And so anyway, it's been really interesting to try it as a new genre in writing about Parkinson's. I feel this amazing liberation, actually. So the first one's a regular poem, and the other 2 are prose poems, which could also be short essays, whatever. So the first one is Crumbs. I am watching the dog who is watching Hal, waiting for his crumbs, ready to make the move to the place underneath his chair. She is patient, her body alert and poised. Alas, when Hal stands, more crumbs fall from his placemat, the edge of the table, and his beard. A shower of breadcrumbs, corn kernels, pieces of fish, and, if she's lucky, salmon skin itself. She makes the move, feasting on the crumbs as if they are manna left in the wilderness, just for her. She's never interested in my crumbs. I've given up on the idea of having a crumbless house or a husband who wears an adult bib or dining cloth protector, as they call it. Neither of us wants that. I try not to feel like Cinderella as I sweep up the crumbs the dog has missed or plain doesn't want. The table has become one of Hal's mini battlegrounds, along with the sidewalk, a restaurant, or even our living room. She follows him out of the room, as she always does, pausing when he pauses at the sofa before taking the next step. She stares up at him, ready to go. Here's a prose poem, Away. Sometimes I just want to walk out the front door and never come back. Just keep walking down the street as if I'm going to the store or the bus stop, as if everything is okay. No one would think anything of it. I wouldn't be carrying a bag or a purse, not even a coat. I would just be walking somewhere away from the house and the car, the husband and the dog, away from making dinner or straightening up, away from all the lists, the morning to-do list, the grocery list, the still to-do list, and the end-of-day gratitude list that someone said I should do. I take step after step, walking down the street, wondering if anyone would notice that I'm gone, that dinner is not on the table, the dog isn't fed, the front porch light hasn't been turned on, and the garbage and recycling cans aren't out. Sometimes when I walk, I imagine that I'm already away, a far off place or another country even, and that I'm walking down a sidewalk in Rome or a pebbled path on the Isle of Skye. I squint my eyes a bit when I do this so that I could pretend better, so that a shrub can become a moss-covered rock in Wales or the sunset, a mountain range in the distance. I can smell someone else's dinner being cooked and imagine that someone is making dinner for me, preparing a special meal of shrimp and cut up tomatoes, a baguette and a salad. I imagine walking into one of these other houses, into someone else's life, and leaving mine behind. Beyond words. My husband is talking, but I can't understand a word he is saying. His voice sounds muffled and blurred, like he's speaking underwater. The words are monotonous, indistinguishable, but I grasp for them, trying hard to find one word, just one word that I can understand, hoping it will give me a clue to the rest. Hal thinks he's speaking fine, that he can be understood. It's one of the curses of Parkinson's, that he doesn't know when he is speaking low or undecipherably, or that he's taking small steps instead of big ones, or writing the tiniest letters you have ever seen, micrographia they call it, instead of his good schoolboy cursive. I ask him to repeat what he said once, twice, 3 times, and I guess at what the words are and repeat them back to him. Swimming pool, drool, blue drool, school, summer school. I throw humor in because this is the part when one or both of us starts to lose patience. I get tired of asking him to repeat, and he gets tired of repeating. Sometimes that's when we give up. I imagine his unrecognized sentences out there, floating around, ununderstood, spoken but not conveyed. But he keeps talking this time, and I listen for what I hear beyond words, to the way he is saying what he is saying, to the gentleness in his voice and its warmth. I see his eyes light up, sharing his thoughts with me. I find myself listening, no longer caring about words. I finally see that he is speaking to me beyond words. Thank you.
Thank you, Minter and Hal. Our next reader is Sara Houghteling. I was corrected with her pronunciation of her name, Houghteling.
Thank you.
Sara.
I'm tremendously moved to be part of this really important project, and thank you all for being here. And I wanted to dedicate my reading to the memory of my father and in honor of my mother, and the tremendous partnership that she had with my dad for the 17 years of his Parkinson's. I'm reading a short section from the beginning of my story, The Crossing Guard, which tells about a young woman who's moved home to take a job as a nighttime crossing guard on the train tracks that run alongside her house in a Midwestern college town. The crossing guard post is part of a suicide prevention initiative in her town, but the real reason she takes the job is she can look after her widowed father who has Parkinson's. After yesterday's showers, cherry blossom petals confetti our flagstone walk, and I notice their loveliness and my own fresh sense of purpose. I'm daunted by my new job, but grateful since it will allow me the chance to check in on my father at night from time to time. Because what are the odds that something bad will happen the moment I step away from the tracks? And Dad has even followed my instructions and is sleeping peacefully in the rocking chair. He has an old dead friend's book on Rodin open on his chest, as if he were hugging it to him for comfort. I kiss his bald forehead and he wakes, yet only his eyes smile. He gives a ballerina gesture with his wrist, since his fingers haven't yet gotten the message to point, and I gather this means I'm to join him. We take in the evening, the bicycles pedaling past in waves timed by the tides of trains and traffic. Sports practice must have just let out at my high school alma mater. Kids whir by in their team uniforms with their helmets dangling from their bikes' handlebars. I look at the gash above my father's temple, still healing from his fall at the adult daycare facility, the last straw. He seems so delicate, it's hard to imagine that most of the world still takes not falling for granted. Father crosses his long legs beneath the Afghan. How? He starts. In the patch of sky before us, sparrows swoop and dart. I wait. How? He tries again. His hand rises, falls. I try not to interrupt. I listen for the faint breath that might hint at the words from which I might lift his train of thought and cradle it forward. I try to remind myself that being in each other's presence is more important than any words that are communicated. I put my hand on his, which is cold and tremoring. Trains pass. Their sound shakes a new shower of petals onto the walk. He says. How is my new job, I offer. I've told him I'm going to work security on the train tracks at night, but I'm not certain how much of this he understands. His face is a mask. And now frustration darkens his eyes and gives them a hard glitter. He deflates a breath. The words are stuck. Illogically, I resent him saying this. If he's only granted a few coherent words in a day, then he's just used up 4 of them. Instead, I ask if he's hungry, and he nods and grasps the wicker chair's armrests to rise. Before Parkinson's, he stood at 6'4½", tipped the scales at 220 pounds. Now he's gaunter each day, and when he stands, as he does now, his head hangs nearer to mine. He sways, and I thrust my hip against the side of his thigh and weave my arm under his armpits, and we make our way into the house as the porch's floorboards groan beneath our steps. Once in the kitchen, I loop an apron over his head, maneuver him to the table, tune the radio past NPR to bird songs of the Midwest. We eat last night's leftovers, rice and beans, easy to swallow, easy to chew. I scoop the last few bites into his mouth, and a moan through pressed lips tells me it's good. He hums an improvised ditty, which is his brain's way of communicating contentment. Next, a bowl of ice cream for each of us from his favorite place on campus, near the art museum, where he used to work in the conservation department. He's so tired after his nighttime meds, tired from eating, from walking from porch to kitchen, from kitchen to bathroom, that it's all I can do to keep him awake while I'm brushing his teeth. I've given up on floss, though one of his molars looks ominous. I dress him in flannel pajamas and tuck him into bed, straitjacket tight so he won't roll or be tempted to roam. On his desk, I set out the new baby monitor. I can tell already it's going to eat through the AAA batteries. Yet anything is cheaper than a nursing home or an ER visit. Not that our precarious finances are even the main reason to avoid these places. Dad has made me vow that he'll never have to set foot in either of them. He's clear of his wishes, to die in his house, in his own bed. No tubes, no IVs, no extraordinary measures. Not like your poor mother. His advanced directives, discussed 5 years ago when it seemed impossible at the office of the neurologist who had said, talk about these things while he can. I twist the monitor's dial and a red light illuminates. Then I turn on my receiver, which bleats with feedback until I walk into the hall. I keep going, out of the house and across the tracks. I hold the receiver to my ear. Even past the grade, I can make out the sound of my father's breath, his coughs and chortles. There's static, and I realize the signal's crossing with other devices on similar frequencies. I hear a baby crying, a radio station with mariachi music, and one side of the telephone call in which a man is berating Barbara about her spending on shoes and gifts. Then Dad again. I return to the porch, to the rocking chair, to examine the clouds and the bats chasing insects between telephone poles. An owl hoots from the boughs of the maple next door. I pull the Afghan over my shoulders and think, not for the first time, of the perversity of disease. How father needed steady, trustworthy hands for his work, which was everything to him. How Degas went blind, Beethoven deaf, Schumann, damaged hands, damaged sanity. My mother with her gorgeous figure and the tumor in her breath. Now Dad's breathing is easy, and soon I too am asleep. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you. I wanted to make another point that the full text of the writing is on the website. So you can go to the website. Brian also has the full text of Brian Peterson's work, and Sara's work is on the website. Well, I am the next reader, and I'm going to read a book called, or a book. I'm not going to read a book. I'm going to read a poem called Parsons' Cider Mill, Worcester, Mass, for Ken Moynihan, historian. You took us to a brook. We watched it swirl around ice, cutting innovative shapes. The cider mill, centuries old, would still be crushing apples, you explained, exactly the way they used to if it hadn't burned down 2 decades ago. You took my father on this same trail a few years before his death, walked me in his footsteps under Cardinal's slurry duet, gave me memory of what he adored. Overblown silver maples and their bony roots. The town's genius for assembly, the felter's mill, the rug factory, the loom works, a dam made solely to pond water for mill power. Over that clever river, we crossed an undeniably solid bridge. We walked slow through the falling snow. You insisted on going the whole route, even though your boots drew long skid marks, your right hand twitching in a rhythm unsyncopated to your words, mild and certain, as you stood in the past, ferrying back to us each precise narrative. Those who labored round the clock within these buildings, the bones of which are still hoisted and somehow hopeful. Did those ghosts fantasize that there would be an us lost in their future to remember them while they lifted crates of apples, cleaned blades, and made mash of cores? Are we all somehow time-stamped? How could we have imagined that just a few years later, you would die the same date my father died? I want to remember this. At some point inside the ruin, we pass a stone wall, standing alone. An iron window frame miraculously grips a stack of tightly packed rocks. The air hardens our voice as we call through the window in false, joking hellos. I thought you looked past my eyes to someone else alongside me. Coveralls and blistered palms? Or did you see my father there waiting and waving a glass of cider? And our next reader is Roberta Schine.
Thank you. I dedicate my story, What I Haven't Lost, to the students in my yoga classes for people with Parkinson's. Many of them are here tonight. What I haven't lost. The only other person on the elevator tugged at my backpack as I was getting off on the 5th floor at Mount Sinai Union Square Hospital. I was about to teach my chair yoga class for people with Parkinson's. She said, "Excuse me, ma'am, your backpack is open. Should I close it?" Before I could answer, she continued, "There, I closed it. Be careful next time." 20 minutes later, my students were parking their walkers and canes and slowly settling into the chairs I had arranged in a circle. Suddenly, a security guard came into the room and handed me my wallet. Someone had found it on the elevator floor and brought it to his desk in the lobby. I told him about the woman in the elevator who closed my backpack. "Yep," he said, "you were pickpocketed. It's been happening." It was a creepy feeling. The cash, about $30, was gone. Everyone started offering to give me money for bus fare to get home. Gerard suggested I should be grateful that my driver's license and credit cards were still there. I agreed. I pulled myself together and began the class with a short meditation on the question, what haven't I lost? Then I asked the group to share. They responded in barely audible voices, typical of people with Parkinson's. The love in my heart. My sense of humor. I still feel compassion. My husband. I haven't lost my electric wheelchair. Fred, who once told us his grandson calls him Grandpa Grumpy, was the last to speak. Nothing, he growled. There's nothing I haven't lost. Parkinson's has taken everything from me. my friends, my job. I can't even take pictures anymore because of the tremors. And you know something? I hate these Parkinson's is a gift Zen discussions. The room got tense. I took a deep breath and hoped the right words would come out of my mouth. My work isn't for sissies. Then Tiny Simone, who always sits next to Fred, with a chair on his other side always remains empty, touched his arm lightly and said, "Come on, Fred. There must be something you like that you still have." "Well, okay," he finally conceded. "These free yoga classes are okay, I guess, but they're not as good as the free boxing classes. And I guess I don't hate all of my doctors, but still, I think these discussions are stupid." A younger man in the class said, "I know what you mean, Fred." Several people nodded their understanding. Fred lowered his head. We continued the class. I led some gentle stretches, light strengthening exercise, and something my students call face aerobics. We stood behind our chairs and lifted one foot at a time to improve balance, and then worked on posture as we moved around the space. When I said that pressing your hips forward can help you stand up straight, Janine quipped that it made us look very sexy. Everyone chuckled. For voice practice, 2 people at a time pulled their chairs to opposite ends of the room and had a conversation. The distance between them forced them to speak loud enough to be heard. Class ended at 8 p.m. My students helped each other put on and zip their coats. It took forever. Coordination is an issue for people with movement disorders. I always tell myself that maybe next week I'll end a little early so I can get home in time to eat dinner before I watch the news. I never do, though. Finally, my students were saying their goodbyes. I heard Fred ask, "Anyone want to go out for coffee?" The response was a chorus of yeses. I didn't take money from my students for bus fare. As I walked the 5 blocks home on 14th Street, I caught a glimpse of myself in a store window. I was smiling.
Thank you, Roberta. We have 2 more readers. I was going to try to touch in with Cynthia. Did you get your, is she still here?
No, Cynthia didn't come back.
Oh, she didn't come back. Okay. Maybe at the end I can read her poem. I don't know. What do you think, Minter?
Yeah, that's fine. That's a good idea.
Yeah, I just want to her okay, I'll find it in the our last reader is Kevin Hinkle. There you are. Okay.
Thank you for including me in the anthology and for including me in the reading tonight. I've really enjoyed hearing the other readers. I have 3 short poems. The first one is the one that will be included in the anthology. It's called Backstory. I wake with a grunt and kick the sheet off violent dreams, knuckles pressing skin, arms swinging but missing. The urge to fight grows at night and flows quickly away when the sun separates the blinds. I realize that it's not really my dreams that have called for the clinch. My brain's attempting to embody my enemies, give them throats I can grab, windpipes I can crush, arteries I can pierce. It's trying to make me believe that I have some control. But this brain that attacks during the day can't ingratiate itself at night. The next poem is called Pops. Today I'm Pops to the smooth-faced barista, impatient with my lagging gait and the growing line. What can I get you, Pops? I consider moral outrage, but I'm preoccupied. Stiff arms not swinging, right leg not committed to movement. Iced tea, I take my time replying. What size, Pops? Bigger than you've got, son. I think, but settle on medium. I want to leap the counter to grapple respect out of the pumped up man-child. But instead I stand to the side as he turns away, appreciating his face unburdened and the granite-veined hands that roughly lift my cup. And finally, I have a more recent poem from the last couple of months. It's called Crushed Berry. I stepped on a berry on my walk through the woods and cried a little at the feeling of its soft body squashing underfoot, as if I had stepped on a frog or other small animal, which couldn't bear my weight. I watched the red juice flow and kneeled to mourn it for a moment before moving on. I regret that so few of us are capable of the slow, patient move, the encompassing glance. The berry was so full and purple, ready to let its juices leak a little at a time. Can there be anything more satisfying than letting go quietly, unnoticed, without resistance or disruption? I took that away with one careless step. My emotions are on the surface these days. I'm ready to crumble at the slightest torn bark and flinch when kids use a penknife to etch their initials into the trees. It's as though a hunter is notching my back so as not to lose his way. Strange how losing one's way can happen through such opposite actions. How much difference can be found in eating a berry or notching birch bark? Hunters believe in their mastery, their right to mark territory. I have never felt anything but sadness in staking claims.
And thank you everyone for joining us. This has been amazing, and there's been beautiful comments in the chats. And
Yeah, it's been, Hal and I are both really very moved by the writing that we heard tonight, and just so proud of the just the work and just putting this together. And I just wanted to also add that we don't know if there's any other literary magazine out there that just focuses on writing about Parkinson's. So as far, I know there is in Europe, but so this was really the first of its kind, and just blown away and very moved. And do you have anything to say?
No.
Hal's moved too, I can tell. But anyway, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen Minter.
Thank you, everyone. We're gonna put this recording up on the Bowery Poetry Club's YouTube. We'll send a link, and please be free. Feel free to share. We're gonna start with the first reader. We're not gonna include all the bios and everything. But thank you again. Appreciate it, and please stay in touch. I'm sure we'll put out some more editions in the future as well. Thanks. All the best. Have a good night. Ciao.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.